The sacred is revealed in the ordinary. There is a beauty in this. But how do we discover the mystery of the sacred in our seemingly mundane existence? Welcome to Revealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Let's join our hosts, Katie McAllister and Tony Pickler, as they explore the lives of people, organizations, and resources that will help us delve into the sacredness of the ordinary.
It's time for another special guest in our Revealed podcast. We are so excited. We've already had tons of laughs before we even hit record on this podcast. And so now we're having you join us in the laughter. So, Tony, who is our guest in the studio today?
Well, our mystery guest today comes all the way from Waupaca, Wisconsin, central Wisconsin. Her name's Betty Manion. I've known Betty for, I believe, going on 30 years. And I first met Betty as we were going to travel to a service trip out in Hartford, Connecticut back in 1994. Betty, just a quick story before, Betty, we turn this over to you a little bit with some questions. But the first time I met you, Betty, if you remember this, you were bringing some young people from Waupaca to this on this trip, and I was bringing some people from Green Bay, and we were going to meet in Oshkosh. And so we get to Oshkosh, and you and the girls from Waupaca pile into my van, and you enter the van with a big gulp from 7-Eleven, 32 ounces of soda for a 20-hour drive. So we get to Gary, Indiana, if you remember, and you said, Tony, can we stop? Because I really need to go to the bathroom. And I said, yeah, sure, Betty. And how long have you had to go? She says, since Milwaukee. So anyway, it was a great time meeting you, getting to know you, and incidentally, the reason I did get to know you is because I literally drew the short straw. So me and two other people were going on the trip, two other adults, and the three of us knew each other. None of us knew you, and so we actually literally drew straws to see who gets Betty Manion from Waupaca in their van. I drew that straw. And that trip out to Hartford and back formed a lifelong friendship. So thanks for being here, Betty.
Absolutely.
It's so good to have you as our next guest here.
The short straw.
So
I am only 5'1".
You are a short straw. You are a short straw. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, my. Sure. Well, I grew up in Chicago, and I went to St. Norbert College, and while I was at St. Norbert College, they needed people to be catechists. So I signed up for that. And so I taught religion on Sunday mornings, which was a really good thing. I enjoyed being with kids because I was an education major. But it was also a good way on Saturday night if you were out with someone you didn't really care to be with any longer. You'd say, I have to go back to the dorm because I have to teach religion in the morning. They'd be like, what?
The ultimate blow-off.
I know. It was a great life. So anyway, I met my husband at St. Norbert. He was a year older than me, and we got married, and we stayed in Wisconsin. He's a Madison boy. So we've lived in the Waupaca area for 48 years, maybe, and love it. And so when we joined the parish at St. Mary Magdalene in Waupaca, the director of religious ed, Sister Lisa Lucht, who was awesome. Yeah. She knew I was a St. Norbert grad, and she said, would you be a catechist? And I said, sure, I have some experience. So that was back in 1978, and so ever since then, I've been involved in religious education. So I was a catechist for probably 15 years, and then when our DRE retired, Father came to me and said, would you take on the position? I said, no, I would never do that. Thanks a lot. We had 4 kids, and I was like, no, I'm busy. I'll just continue to be a catechist. Well, 2 years later, he came back, and talk about the spirit being alive and well. He asked me the same question, and this time I really, really considered it at a much higher level, and I realized it would mean that I would have to go back to St. Norbert and get a master's degree in theology. And I had 4 not young kids, middle school and high school, and thought, you know what, I can do this. And so I did, and going back as an adult to get another degree was probably one of the most inspiring and fulfilling things that I've ever done. And then it led to my 25-year position at St. Mary Magdalene as the Director of Religious Education. And they say when you love your job, you never go to work. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly how I felt. So I was responsible for all the faith formation classes there. We don't have a Catholic school. We had 500 kids in our program and a satellite program in Iola. And we had classes 3 days a week. It was a pretty rigorous program. But I will definitely say the highlight of my program days was our Young Neighbors experience. And that was a program when you, Tony, worked for the diocese and you were the head of youth ministry and you started these service learning trips. And I didn't know anything about that. It was a very new concept back then, I think. And so I answered the call, and then I was the short stick lady.
You were.
It wasn't until years later that you tell me that story, and I'm like, you, whatever.
We did it well.
We did. And that trip, when I think about sacred moments, was truly the start of something different in my life, and certainly something different in your life. You really took that and went with it. So, and ever since then, I took kids on service trips every summer and loved it. That was like literally the best part of my job.
So, Betty, I know you, well, how I was first introduced to you was your storytelling, and that's kind of what drew me to the Betty Manion experience was your storytelling. So how did you get into storytelling? And
well, that's a story. But by the grace of God, that's all I can say is I've always liked theater and things like that and did plays and stuff in high school. And I remember as a little girl, whenever I'd be caught telling a lie or a perspective lie, my father would look at me and he'd say, "Now, Betty, don't tell me any stories." So apparently it's a gift I was born with even as a child. I can just remember that finger. "Now, don't tell me any stories." "Okay, Dad." So when I was a young mom in Wapaka and I didn't work outside the home, there was a group through AAUW, which was Association of College Women. And we had a group in Wapaka, and there were about 8 of us, and we would go out to schools and libraries in our area, and we would read stories to kids. So we all had a script, and we all had a hat for whatever our character was, and I loved it. But we followed our script, so you knew when you were supposed to talk. And so one night we had a substitute in the group, and we got done with our performance or whatever you call it. And Mary said to me, she said, "I had to follow you a lot of times in the story, and I couldn't because I didn't know where we were in the script because you just kept adding all these things." I said, "Really? You did?" "I did?" She said, "Yeah, like a lot." So she said, "Have you ever heard of storytelling?" I said, "No, what is it?" And she said, "Well, pretty much what you just did tonight. You just made up stuff for your characters." And she, at the time, was studying for a master's degree in library science at Madison. And so she said, "There's a whole world of storytelling out there where people actually go out and just tell stories." I said, "Without scripts or anything?" And she said, "Yeah." I was like, "Wow, that sounds great." So I actually went down to Madison and took some classes, summer classes in storytelling. And just for my own benefit, I didn't think I would do anything with it. And then that following Christmas, a group asked our group to perform and Christmas stories. And there were only going to be 4 of us, and 3 of them got sick. So it was just me. So I called the lady and I said, "I'm sorry, we can't do it. My cohorts are sick." And she said, "Didn't you take that storytelling class this summer?" I said, "Yeah, well, not to do it." And she said, "Well, why did you take it?" I'm like, "Well, I like stories." She said, "Please, we're desperate. Will you come and do it?" I said, "No, I can't." "Oh, okay." Mm-hmm. So I learned 3 Christmas stories. Actually did it all wrong. I memorized 3 Christmas stories, which is not what storytelling is. You don't memorize a story, but I did. and went in shaking and told these 3 stories to these group. I think it was the Girl Scouts, this young group of girls. And it was a whole, gymnasium full of them. So there happened to be some teachers in the audience, and they came up to me afterward and said, wow, that was great. Would you ever come to our school and tell stories? And I remember having the deer in the headlights look like, no, I'm not a storyteller. No, I don't do this. And they said, please, we'd love to have you come and tell your Christmas stories. So cooking and shaking, I did it. I said, okay, and went and told those 3 stories that I had memorized, because I realized storytelling is not about memorization. You memorize the plot, but you make up everything as you go along. So I went, and that's how my career got started as a storyteller. And they paid me. I was like, oh my gosh, they paid me to do this. That I really liked it. So before you knew it, I was a storyteller, and I traveled all over the Midwest and did assemblies and libraries and whatever, and loved it.
Do you remember what my favorite story is that you tell?
Yes, I do. And it's about the lady.
Yes, it is.
And okay, yes. I'm going to tell you a little story about that story, because that story, more than any story that I tell, illustrates what storytelling is all about. I had originally heard this story told by a famous storyteller called Milbrae Birch, and I actually was able to study under her for a week once. And she told this story, and it was about immigrants coming from Ireland, and a tragic mother dying on the ship, and it's really a tragic story, but it's got a hopeful ending. So anyway, I loved the story, and it was months later at a St. Patrick's Day gathering that they asked me to come and tell St. Patrick's Day stories. And I thought, I remember Milbrae's story about the Irish ship coming over. And so I'm going to tell that story. Now, it was not published. It was not written. I had just heard it once. So I wrote down the story exactly as I remembered it. And I told it. And it, people loved it, blah, blah, blah. So later I saw Milbrae Birch again, and I said, hey, by the way, I have to come clean here. I'm telling your story. She said, which one? I said, well, about the Irish lady. And she said, Lady of Liberty story? I said, no, wasn't the name of the story Good Morning Mom? She said, no. I said, oh, okay, well, I gave it a new title. And she said, so tell me a little about the gist of the story. So I told her, and she said, Betty, that is not my story at all. The only thing in the story that's the same is the Statue of Liberty. And I was like, no, it's the same. She said, I will send you a written copy of that story when I get home, and you're going to see. Sure enough, she sent me a copy of that story. The only thing the same was the trip from Ireland and the Statue of Liberty. So to me, and she laughed when she said it. She said, well, that's the power of storytelling. Because when we hear a story based on our life experiences and who we are, and we take that story in. And I've since learned that, because I can tell a story to a whole room full of people, and everybody hears the story differently because it's based on their own experience. So to me, it illustrated the power of story and how we are all so hungry for story, because when we hear other people's stories, it spurs in us that, I had the same kind of experience. So stories are what connect us as brothers and sisters.
And to me, what's interesting is I didn't even know the title. Mm-hmm. So as you probably know, I just call it The Lady. And you know how many times I've said, hey, Betty, tell the lady story, Betty.
You have, yeah. So it's interesting that we all come up with our own. So that's the power of story. Mm-hmm.
So we've done Young Neighbors in Action together as program directors for many years. Can you just tell us a little bit about that role of program director, what Young Neighbors in Action is all about, before maybe we get into a story or two about Young Neighbors?
Sure. That program pretty much takes words away from me, because I don't know that you can put into words the experiences that we had with young people and serving our brothers and sisters from all different parts of the country. I mean, we went from California to the Atlantic to Boston to Hartford, Connecticut, and everything in between. We were on Indian reservations. We were in the worst areas of major cities in the United States. We were in the South. We experienced poverty at so many different levels throughout the United States. And to bring young people from the Diocese of Green Bay to that situation was eye-opening. And I remember, you very well remember, on those Monday mornings when we drive up to work sites with the young people and they'd have a deer in the headlights look like, we're going to do what? Where? And by Friday, they had such an openness and an awakening within inside of them as to our call as brothers and sisters to care for everyone. So it was just the most wonderful experience. And it was fun to do it with you because we had a lot of laughs about it.
So what's your, tell a couple stories about Young Neighbors. What are a couple of your favorite either people you met or situations we got ourselves into?
Okay. So, and you chime in here too.
This is the Betty Manion show.
Oh,
Yeah, the Betty Manion experience.
Stop it. Okay, Tony. So do you remember the story about the horse in the house?
I do.
So Tony and I had a group of young people, and we drove up to this like house on a ranchy kind of situation. It was the plains. It's high desert. There was tumbleweed all around. Broken down fences and like horse skulls in the fence and whatever. And we drove up with these young people. And actually, we drove up alone. The young people were there, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And we walked in the house with like curtains hanging out of the windows and the door hanging off, the front door hanging off. And there's this group of young people standing there with their eyes wide open. And they said, we're so glad to see you too, because we were program directors at the time. We have this job of cleaning up this house, and there's a horse that's been living in the house. and we were, a horse? A horse is a horse, of course. And they said, yeah, and we don't know anything about it. We were just called to come to this abandoned house and clean up this horse and all. There's hay. The horse had bedded down in the living room. The kitchen was trashed. And so we said, okay, there's obviously a story here, so we're going to get the story. Because these kids were kind of not really excited about this project. Imagine that. So I remember we made a phone call and we got the story. It had been an elderly man on the Yakima Reservation. Mm-hmm. And his wife had passed away from cancer, I believe. And he had a daughter who also was sick, who had 3 young sons. And she was hospitalized, and so he was caring for these 3 young boys, and then I believe he had some heart issues. Mm-hmm. So the 3 boys got taken to foster care. The elderly man got taken to a rehab center, and the house was abandoned. And social services, I think from the tribe, came in and said, we need to help this man. Because he loved these 3 young grandsons so much, and all he wanted to do was to get back to his home with these young boys. Well, once our young people heard that story, do you remember the transformation in that house over the course of a week?
Sure. Yeah.
The house was spotless. The house was immaculate. Those young people even went out and bought bedspreads. They bought sheets. They turned those little boys' bedrooms back into bedrooms that little boys could be welcomed back to. They turned this elderly man who is now in a wheelchair. They built a wheelchair ramp. I think they even bought shrubbery, didn't they? And
they
bought it, put it around,
house, right?
And made the exterior beautiful and had a wheelchair ramp. Mm-hmm. And on Friday, I remember social services for the reservation going to the rehab center and bringing that man back to that house in that wheelchair, up that ramp, and all those young people were there to welcome him back to his home so that he could get his 3 grandchildren back. And I just remember the work of that trip and the smiles, and once those young people learned the story, it all made sense, and they were willing to jump right in. Now, that's not to say we always get the story, but when we get the story, it sometimes makes the work more real that we're doing, particularly for young people.
And that relationship was developed from the young people and this man that they had never met, but on that Friday, actually got to meet him.
They got to meet him.
It was amazing.
It was Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then the other one that stands out in my mind is Sarah Snake. So we had a group of young people on the Winnebago Indian Reservation in Winnebago, Nebraska. And we actually stayed at one of the missions that was started by St. Catherine Drexel and is still going to this day. And our site coordinator was a Native American woman by the name of Miss Sarah Snake. And so yours and my job, Tony, was to work with her throughout the week. She provided all the experiences, the service experience for the kids. And we traveled around to make sure that the kids were doing what they were supposed to do. And so I remember one night Sarah Snake took us out on the reservation to a beautiful river area. And she was talking to our young people, a whole group of young people, probably 100 young people, about life on the reservation and the ups and downs and how the Winnebago tribe, what they've done to embrace their identity and bring hope to their people. And they've made beautiful strides with what they have on the reservation. And so high school students being high school students, I remember one of the young people said to Sarah, "So, Sarah, what do you do on the reservation?" And she said, "Well, I'm the HR director for the entire tribe." And so they pushed her a little and said, "So what does that mean?" She said, "Well, I'm in charge of HR, just like anybody HR, a big company. It's my job. So I hire people, I fire people, I, make sure that they have benefits and things like that." And so the young people said, "So Sarah, what kind of benefits would that be?" Meanwhile, you and I our eyebrows are up in the air like, oh my goodness. So where is this going to go? Right, Tori?
Absolutely.
And they said, well, Miss Sarah said, well, I, my job is to make sure that people have what they have. And so 401ks, insurance, just like your parents would have when they were. So one of the young people pressed it farther and said, "So 401k, that's putting money away. So do you have that too?" And I'm thinking, what? Where are we going with this? And Sarah didn't bat an eye, and she said, "Yes, I do. I have a 401k plan. Well, actually, I could, but I choose not to use it." And they pressed even farther and said, "Well, why would that be? Because isn't it responsible to take care of yourself in the future and your family and to put money away for your future?" And she said, "It absolutely is." But she said, "I can't do that because my brothers and sisters here on the reservation have needs right now. And I don't feel right putting money away for my future when my brothers and sisters don't have the things that they need right now. So I choose to take money that I would put into a 401k and to help my brothers and sisters because I know someday when I'm older, they will also take care of me." She said, "We have something here on the tribe that's called we give till it hurts." And I will never forget that line as long as I live, as probably you too, Tony.
Absolutely.
Give till it hurts. It's one thing to give out of your surplus. It's one thing to give out of maybe your comfort zone. But when you have to give till it hurts, that's what we're called to do.
Kind of a rest of the story with the Sarah Snake story and giving till it hurts was I remember across the street from the mission was a Native American store where you could buy various things, moccasins and this and that, different art, pieces of art. And you bought a storytelling doll, as I remember it. And you were so excited to bring that storytelling doll back to Wisconsin and use it in your storytelling career, part of your career. And at the end of the week, Sarah wound up in the hospital. I don't know if we drove her to the hospital. I mean, like literally drove her to the hospital. But she wound up in the hospital. And so on our way out of town, heading back to Wisconsin, we stopped at the hospital to say goodbye to Sarah Snake. And I'll never forget, you brought the doll with you, and you gave that to Sarah. And I remember going back to the car, and I said, "Betty, you wanted that doll so badly. You wanted to bring that to Wisconsin. Why did you do that?" And you said, "I give until it hurts." And it was such a moment that I'll never forget. That's connected to Sarah Snake as well.
I forgot about that. Okay, but I wasn't really that holy because I remember I had it in my hands. Should I or shouldn't I? And you kind of looked at me and I was like, oh, Tony the good guy. Okay, I'll bring it up and give it to Sarah Stay. So it was a two-way deal. But thank you for that. Yeah, give till you hurt. It was awesome. So thanks. I'm a little teary here, Tony.
I think we all are.
So the power of stories.
Yeah.
You know, it totally connects us as brothers and sisters. And I think we have so little left today that in our world that seems to have a lot of war-torn areas and less than peaceful situations, that when we understand the stories of people, I think that's the only thing that's going to bring us all together, when we realize our brothers and sisters across the oceans are no different than us. They might look different, speak differently, and live in different homes and whatever. But we are all called to care for one another.
So, Betty, our podcast is really about exploring the sacred in our ordinary lives. So where do you see God revealed in your life and throughout, your past?
Well, I see God in the world around me. I think the older you get, you can't help but look around and look at our beautiful planet and just see the environment, the leaves, the snow, the mountains, the lakes, the rivers, the oceans. It's so beautiful when you see this beautiful world that we've been given to live in and to care for. And then the holiness of our brothers and sisters around us. When I do presentations for storytelling, one of the things that I try to hone in on, one of the principles, is to practice random acts of kindness. And I don't know if you remember, maybe 20 years ago, that was the buzzword, random acts of kindness, little books everywhere, blah, blah, blah. So it was interesting because I've always, I've used that as one of my concepts in doing programs about practice random acts of kindness. And then interestingly, this Christmas, our parish gave away a book, I don't know if you had it, was one of Matthew Kelly's, about holy moments. And, they give you that book to take home, and it's Christmas, and it goes on the counter, and then it goes on the coffee table. And I finally picked it up in January, as I'm putting Christmas decorations away, and sat down and thought, what is this holy moment, whole principle? And as I read it, I realized it's connecting a random act of kindness to the sacred. And I just sat there like this revelation, like, oh my goodness, random act of kindness. Yes, we're helping our brothers and sisters. But in the context of a holy moment where we're connected up above and then reaching our hands out, it's the whole premise of the cross, in communion with our God and giving out to our brothers and sisters. So I realized that any kind thing we do, any kind word, any kind action, any kind thing we do in connection to who we are in our heart and in our faith is a holy moment. And that's what we're called to do. Our life should just be filled with holy moments. And in your case, holy fun moments.
Well, Betty, you have been such a dear friend and colleague over the years, and you have touched the lives of so many people in your community of Wapaka, but our diocese, truly the country, people from coast to coast. Your life has touched their lives.
Oh, my.
And we are so appreciative of you spending this time with us and sharing the joy that you have shared with so many people, sharing that with the people who will listen to the Revealed podcast. So thanks for all you've done in this world and in our church to bring the sacred together with the ordinary in such a joyful and fun way. Thanks, Betty.
Well, thank you. I'm so humbled to be asked. Thanks for all you guys are doing. Keep it up.
This has been Revealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin.